Hope you're all well. Really excited to kick off Black History Month with this all-important conversation. To introduce myself, I'm Yasmin Basusi, Digital Marketing Manager at Cision. So I'm usually behind the scenes, but today's a little different. I'm also chair of Cision UK's internal diversity group, Embrace, which aims to honour the diversity of voices across Cision, regardless of background, race, ethnicity or religion. I'll be your moderator today, where we'll be discussing racism within PR. In recent months, racism has been the hot topic of the moment, but how do we keep the conversation going? PRWeek has launched a special edition magazine this month, taking a deeper look into BME issues, initiatives and voices within the comms industry. The theme of the edition is Making PR Anti-Racist. Today, we're joined by the magazine's guest editors, Jennifer Ogunleye, tech PR lead at KPMG, and Julian Obubo, partner at Manifest, alongside PRWeek UK's editor, John Harrington. Welcome and thanks for joining us. Jennifer and Julian, I hope I didn't butcher your names like people do to mine. I get all sorts, so apologies if I did. Before we begin, I'd like to share a few housekeeping bits. So we're tweeting throughout using the hashtag #MakePRAnti-Racist. So let's keep the conversation going online. And to the left, there is a Q&A panel. So if you want to type your questions throughout the webinar, then go ahead. And just a reminder that an on-demand copy of this webinar will be available after the session. So we'll aim to send that out either tomorrow or Monday. Jennifer, over to you.
I think it's over to you, John, to introduce the...
Apologies. Good start. My apologies for that. Welcome, everyone. It's really great to be part of this, and thank you to Cision. I wanted to first of all set the scene on the importance of the PR industry and this issue. As you can see, this is our cover story with Shukra Muna here. We had an interview with the high-profile former politician who recently joined PR. We wanted to start the edition with a heavyweight figure, arguably the most well-known non-white person working in UK PR, who has a significant new role at the world's biggest comms agency. It's a testament really to our ambitions for this issue, which also includes insights, interviews with journalist, comedian and ex-PR Aisha Hazarika, and insights from dozens of BME PR professionals, including creative innovators, internal comms chiefs, political experts, agency bosses, campaigners and more.
Yeah, I think I was going to say it's super important to do this edition. Not only is it timely, but we are an industry that is valued at almost £15 billion. And I think it's a travesty that, you know, when we do these PR censuses, we still find that the numbers of Black, Asian, and minority ethnic people working in the industry is actually declining. I think the last CIPR census showed a decline from 11% in 2015 to 8% in 2019, which is unfortunate. But I think now, especially post the resurgence of the Black Lives Matter movement in the summer, I think now is a time to actually address some of the core issues and some of the core foundational problems that lead to this industry decline. And I think that's what we tried to do with this edition. That's what we tried to bring as guest editors. And hopefully through this webinar and through the actual reading of the magazine, you'll be able to see how we brought that to life. And I'm sure you probably are wondering, you know, why we have Shaggy, I guess, in this. But I'll let Joe explain that.
Yeah, so on the topic of the power PR, you know, yes, we're a $15 billion industry, but I wanted to include, when I talk to you about why young and diverse talent should choose PR as a career option, I say it's a $15 billion industry. Yes, I refer to the fact that every day can be different and the creativity and the fact that opportunities can be unlimited. But when it came to convincing my parents, who were pushing me to go into accounting and who didn't really quite get what it is that PR is about, and probably still don't understand what it is that I do, in trying to impress upon them and upon people the impact of our industry, I usually always refer to the classic line by Bill Gates, where he's quoted saying, "If I was down to my last dollar, I'd spend it on PR." But in this discussion, I thought I'd change things up as I came across a really enthusiastic endorsement of the hard work that we as PRs do. It came across my feed by a client of Helen Reynolds of Comms Creative. So hope you enjoy.
Hey, yo, what's up? This is Sugar. Yeah. I got to give a big shout out to Comms Creatives in the UK. I got to give a big shout out to yourself. You guys are doing an amazing job lately. Even throughout this pandemic and throughout, you guys are doing an amazing job lately. You got to juggle home and kids and everything. And with all of that, you guys at home, you got to juggle just been on top of it and everything. And with all of that, you guys amazing job. And you know, just been on top of it. What can I say? Hell, Reynolds is just bigging you guys up, and I'm bigging you guys up. Because you guys are doing just an amazing time. It's just bigging you guys up, and I'm bigging you guys up because you guys have been doing just an amazing time.
Bombastic, romantic, fantastic. Say, yo, everything bombastic when up on top. Sugar, yeah.
Okay, so yeah, that was Shaggy. So going forward, when I'm approached by young Black creatives asking, you know, how do you like PR? Is PR really for me? I'll definitely reach for that one in terms of, yes, a lot of our work takes place behind the scenes, but when you do good work, this is how much we can be appreciated by clients. So for me, us as communicators have the power to shape the agenda. So an industry as influential as this truly has the responsibility to do right by its workforce and the diverse array of industries and audiences that it serves and interacts with. So that's for me the power of PR. Over to you, Julian.
Yeah, and quite early on in the discussion on how we wanted to shape this edition, what we wanted to do was actually pull back a little bit, because I think there's a tendency at times to want to come up with initiatives and programs to fix diversity and inclusion in our industry and beyond. But what this summer actually showed us was that there is a fundamental misunderstanding and a fundamental lack of understanding of what the constitutional issues are when it comes to racism in the industry, but also racism in society. And that's because I think we've been trying to tackle diversity as though the need for it isn't a direct result of racism in society. And so while I think a lot of businesses, a lot of companies are comfortable with talking about diversity, it's still a bit of a dirty word. It's still a bit of a heavy word to talk about racism. But essentially, if there's racism in a society, and there are issues of inequality in a society, and there are issues of not having a level playing field in a society, that is going to manifest itself in various sectors of that society, one of them being industries, one of them being, in our case, the PR industry. And so it's one thing to try and come up with initiatives to fix the current problem, but in order for those initiatives to be long-term, in order for those initiatives to last the lifetime of a company, need to be rooted at the cause. They need to essentially find ways to open up the pipeline where people feel they can not only come into the industry, but they can thrive and they can ascend to positions of leadership. So we cannot address the problem of diversity and initiative and inclusion within our industry without actually engaging with the issue of it in society and understanding its various manifestations. And I think that's because we are operating with this narrow definition of what racism is. And that's why it was so important for us to not, use euphemisms and call a spade a spade. This is the anti-racism edition. We're trying to make PR anti-racist. And what we need to do is call out the fact that our popular definition of racism is insufficient. A lot of people just define racist or racism as something white supremacists, nationalists, and neo-Nazis do. without actually understanding the smaller ways, the microaggressions, the more covert ways that it can be expressed, manifested in our society. And what we wanted to do was actually go back to talk to social historians and academics and lay the foundation of what British society today is and how we got to a position where we need to have these discussions. We need to try and fix these issues. And starting at that point, doing it in a broad sort of industry agnostic approach, I think allows people who are reading this edition, who are engaging with the content online, to give themselves that necessary education, that necessary contextual knowledge, so then they can step into the workplace and say, all right, this is what's happening in society. These are the ways it manifests. How then do we ensure that we can build programs and initiatives that actually go to the roots of the issue? Not programs that are superficial, that might win you awards, but programs that ensure that there's more people from diverse backgrounds coming into the workplace, programs that ensure that they feel included and they feel welcome, they feel they can bring their whole selves into it, then programs that ensure that any barrier to inclusivity is addressed and eliminated. And that could be small things of touching people's hair in the workplace. It could be small things of not addressing how you do recruitment well. So people start using words like, I'm not sure it'll be the right fit. Might not necessarily be considered racist by the person saying that. But what it speaks to is that that person probably has some stereotypes about the person sitting in front of them, that they don't think either that person is going to fit in with the company or that person is going to fit in with the clients. And when you start thinking about that term, fit, for example, and how it links back to biases an individual might have, if we engage with it on that level, that's when we really start to come up with long-term solutions. So I think we're all really proud of the approach we used here of going with that wide funnel and then going down into specific things that our industry and people in our industry can do.
So Julian's kind of, when we're asking ourselves that question, is there a racism problem in PR? Julian's kind of looked at the wider societal issue, and I am basically looking at how we've seen racism manifest itself in PR. So when things like institutional racism, unconscious biases, plain old stereotypes, when these things go unchecked, they can filter into every aspect of our lives, including work. And I basically contributed to this edition with a piece on that. And we have seen these racism filter its way into the PR industry time and time again, whether it be huge brands or government campaigns. What should be simply a bit of bad PR, tends to have undertones or outright examples of offensive racial themes, of cultural appropriation, or it's just tone deaf in the application of those campaigns. And sometimes campaigns that seemingly have nothing to do with race. But pictured here is a case where the Home Office launched its 2019 Knife-Free campaign. You might remember this campaign. And they launched it by targeting chicken shops. So it was widely slated for being out of touch and being inherently racist, being an inherently racist campaign. And the accusations were twofold. First, the assumption that knife crime is a black people problem. And second, that the stereotype that black people love chicken. So this campaign, I think where the problem was with this campaign is that it demonstrated no attempt to understand the socio-economic intersection between poverty and knife crime, which has an impact on communities across Britain, from Glasgow, where there's a low black population, to London. And the second stereotype has roots in, if we go back to Julian's point about the history of where these issues come from, it comes from the slavery era in America, where enslaved people were outlawed from owning horses, cattle, pigs. But the entrepreneurial of the enslaved would raise and sell chickens to fund their freedom. And so as this this relationship between black people and chicken, these images and the media and movies, it just became like a kind of sentiment that traveled really widely, including to the UK. So when you see a campaign like this in 2019, which has honorable objectives, and it's obviously it had some creative ways of applying it, unfortunately, it did fall back on lazy, racist stereotypes. And well, in the addition, we go in the magazine, we go into more detail using kind of well-documented examples from across fashion to FMCG to sport. It happens so often that it was hard for us actually to cut down on which examples to go for. So with it happening again and again, at some point you have to ask yourself, why? Is there a racism problem in PR? And secondly, I included some quotes here on this slide. So outside of how racism can manifest itself via the campaigns that we work on, and the work that we do, it's also important to touch on how it can manifest itself in the industry. And so I've included some of the feedback we included in the edition from PR talent, especially those kind of coming into the industry. So these are some quotes from BME PR Pro's mentoring scheme and also the CIPR's recent State of PR report. So you can see for yourself on screen what the kind of the feeling behind kind of entry-level people and other PR practitioners in PR. And as Julian's kind of mentioned, we also covered the barriers to entry when it comes to race, the societal barriers of entry, and we spoke to universities. And one lecturer described the problem of comfort living on a low salary as a real issue for entry-level PRs, because he believed that students from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, which can disproportionately affect some ethnic minority communities, will struggle to hold down a job on low entry salary levels, entry level salaries. So yeah, it's more than just a case of our campaigns. It's more than just a case of who do we have. It's about a case of being inclusive in, as Julian mentioned as well, in our recruitment, in the workplace and beyond. So.
Great, thank you for that. I'm going to talk a bit now about the genesis of this edition, really. And you'll probably be unsurprised to hear that we started talking about it in the aftermath of the George Floyd killing and the uplift in Black Lives Matter protests in the summer. We as PRWeek have covered issues around racism, diversity or lack of, and prejudice in the PR industry in the past. And we've been involved in projects such as the BME mentoring scheme with BME PR Pros, which I'll discuss a bit later. But the events in June were really the spur to take a detailed, in-depth look at racism against Black and other non-white individuals in PR in the form of a special edition. I wrote this article here that you can see on this slide, briefly outlining some of the issues as I saw them. This article prompted many conversations. It soon became clear that it would be a good idea for us to recruit a couple of guest editors who have first-hand experience of these issues and more knowledge of them than I do, and we do in the team. As far as I'm aware, this is the first time PRWeek has run a special edition like this in its history, but it's absolutely right that we do so. As the industry's biggest trade publication, we see ourselves as a critical friend to the communication sector. This means celebrating success, banging the drum for the positive impact of comms, but it also means taking a critical look at what could and should be done to make the industry better and fairer. Okay, part of our coverage has included asking the mentees from the BME mentoring scheme what the sector could do to encourage diversity. These people are largely newcomers or relative newcomers to the industry, so they provide some really interesting insights from professionals at the coalface of a lot of these issues. By the way, the mentoring scheme is run by BME PR Pros, I mentioned earlier, the group led by Elizabeth Bananuka. Kudos to her for all the work she's done in partnership with PRWeek. It's been going for 3 years. I've included some of the quotes here. It's worth reading them. They point to really crucial issues like reverse mentoring, unconscious bias, recruitment and approaches to promotion and more than that. We also checked in with those on best practice. I'm going to now move to the next slide, and it's Julian.
Yeah, so we wanted this edition, as we said, to get people understanding the wider context, but also to give people some practical steps on how they can actually improve things and how they can identify areas for improvement. And one of the most important ways to address racism and become an anti-racist company is factoring in the importance of measurement. If anything isn't mentioned, isn't measured, it usually gets ignored over time. There has to be accountability from the very top. It has to be an issue that is spoken about and reported and addressed in every senior management meeting. It has to be a value that someone who enters the company from day one as an intern understands, and also the CEO can also articulate. Because far too many times it is either not addressed at all, or it's either something that is addressed whenever there's a larger conversation. In this case, the summer we had Black Lives Matter, or it is put to the few or sometimes the only one Black or Asian or minority ethnic person in the company who might not have any interest or expertise in handling it. So this is something that needs to be taken very seriously. I think one of the organizations doing a really good job at this is Blueprint, also devised by Elizabeth Benanuka. It's a diversity mark that is awarded to organizations that are committed to diversity and inclusion. But what's really good about the Blueprint is the hard work it does to ensure that even when you get that mark, you're given a blueprint, essentially. You're given a timeline. You're given a breakdown of the places in which, the areas in which your agency or your company can do better. And it's granular, it's based on the details in your application, and it ensures that you are accountable. Because the mark essentially lasts for 2 years. It's not something you slap onto your email signature and say, you know what, we're done, we solved diversity. It ensures that you're accountable. So after 2 years, you have to reapply with improvements or lose your mark. I think that's super important to ensure this does not just become window dressing and it's actually embedded in the company. And you can actually go on Blueprint's website, this is blueprints.co.uk, and see the 23 commitments that a company has to sign up to and work on once you get either the mark status or the ally status. So it keeps you accountable. Even if you might not be ready yet as an agency, you can go on there and see what those criteria are and start getting yourself prepared for that. So I think it's a valuable resource. Super, super important to keep this industry accountable.
So thank you, Julian. So obviously John's talked about some of the things that the next generation of PR professionals have suggested in terms of improving the industry. Julian's talked about an initiative that Manifest have found some success in, and in terms of accountability. In terms of my thoughts on what can we do about it, this is part of it is part of what we looked at in the edition was we talked to the trade bodies. So the PRCA and the CIPR are the biggest kind of membership bodies in the industry. And so when we talked to them, it kind of demonstrated the fact that from an organizational point of view, from an industry point of view, the importance of representation cannot be underestimated. John's talked about some of the previous kind of commitments that PRWeek have made. But they also made moves earlier this summer to commit to making a concerted effort to include more experts of color in their content and event panels. So when we spoke to the leading industry bodies, and I personally know as a founding member of the PRCA's Race and Ethnicity Equity Board, that while the PRCA had and has a racially diverse staff, its leadership was not reflective of that. And they, in that time, they've made swift moves to correct that at board level and through the launch of the Race and Ethnicity Equity Board, whose first challenge will be to tackle the issue of ethnicity pay gap in the industry. But it was really important to talk to those bodies, to both the CIPR and PRCA, because of the visibility and the power they hold. You need these messages to come from up top. A second part of that kind of representation story in terms of what can we do about tackling this racism problem in PR, it was really important to me personally, and it was amazing to have the support of John and Julian as well, but in what ended up being a really meaty, celebratory part of this magazine, and that was profiling really senior leaders from BME backgrounds, and they kind of talked to us about, and I'm talking senior, like from MD level, from global corporate affairs level, and across charity to FTSE companies to media companies. It was so inspirational for me to see people at that level doing great things, and for them to share their experiences and advice and successes with us. So this wasn't an issue where we were just talking about racism. We also wanted to profile and understand and learn and celebrate people who have made it, regardless of the obstacles, or even because of the obstacles that they faced. In terms of the strength that takes. So yeah, I don't think you can underestimate the ability for people of minority heritage at the top to inspire when their achievements are made visible. And I wouldn't be surprised if the places where they work start receiving more ethnically diverse job applications as well. So I think both talking to the trade bodies and having a chance to interact and learn from and celebrate these leaders really kind of encapsulated that you can't be what you can't see saying, which we also heard a lot from some of the younger PR experts that were included in this feature. So I think that's it from me. Over to John.
Thanks. Yeah. So one issue we looked at in the project was the issue of affirmative action. We had a for and against piece from two PR pros, one of whom was Julian, alongside the view of a legal expert on this issue. We included two of the quotes here. And I thought I would just share my take on these issues from the perspective of an industry observer, if you like, white man who hasn't experienced racism myself. Quite often when I see issues around race and prejudice discussed on social media, I see these issues descending into stereotyping and people making assumptions. And I don't think these are particularly helpful for making progress. Quite a lot of the time I see white man used as an insult. And my natural instinct is to be turned off, to be honest, that this person doesn't know me and has made assumptions about me, that I must be prejudiced, I must be uncaring or at best ignorant. Of course, I am ignorant about many things, as we all are about different things. The point I wanted to make is I think social media is terrible for nuance. This probably won't be a surprise to many people listening. And while I can absolutely understand, the huge amount of frustration, I also think it's important that we as an industry and as a society remember to be respectful and constructive in our conversations, particularly as much of these things will be new to many people. It's okay to disagree about the means as long as we're united in our aim of a fairer industry. And yeah, that is the next thing I'm going to talk about is, it's over to Joe.
All right. As well as, John just touched on allyship or kind of what his thoughts on what can we do as an observer as well as highlighting the affirmative action piece. But as well as that, it's just been an absolute joy to see the impact that this has had, even just anecdotally, and from those who participated and wider, whether it's their companies, whether it's the next generation. So yeah, I just thought we'd include a slide to acknowledge that, yes, we made PR Week history with this edition, but also to kind of look at what impact do we think this magazine may have had over the last few weeks and might have going forward. For me, I said it before and I'll say it again, for me, it's absolutely about inspiration. It's about visibility. PR Week is arguably one of the most prominent news platforms for our industry, and more than news, media platforms for our industry. So although many of us from BME heritage will have had those moments which make us doubt whether this industry is for us, the feedback we've received and in using this opportunity to pack this magazine with full of successful, committed, dedicated, brown and black names and faces will hopefully kind of reset that mindset of, do I belong here? And allow people to know that, we as those of BME heritage can have a hand in making sure this industry is more inclusive. And John just talked about, I think, you kind of talked about yourself as an observer, but I would really see you as an ally. So having John included in this conversation and, actually triggering this, this edition is so important as well, because this isn't a conversation only for us of minority heritage to have. It's a conversation for all of us to be involved in. And the feedback has just been amazing, and I want to do it every week, every month. Yeah, I don't know how Julian and Johnny, how you feel about the impact that for you, the impact that we've kind of had with this edition so far that you wanted to make.
Yeah, I was going to add to that the importance of ensuring that this is a coalition that we're building in order to make the industry anti-racist. I think this can be an inflection point in the PR industry to ensure that we're not just talking to our Black and minority ethnic colleagues to tell us about racism and to try and fix it, but essentially we're building a broad coalition that is invested in understanding the issues, invested in developing strategies and initiatives, and invested in having uncomfortable conversations to actually change things. I want this edition to be that first step. I want people who pick up the physical copy to almost have a Bible of sorts, of history, of initiatives, of action, of strategies to think about ideas that may not necessarily be practical at the moment, maybe more theoretical. I think that's where we wanted to go with the piece on affirmative action, knowing that it's going to be difficult, and in some places pretty impossible to do it in the way it's done in the US, but to actually use that as a basis to think, all right, so what can we actually learn from this? What can we learn from the intention? I think we've got there, and it's really humbling and refreshing to see some of that impact and some of the conversation around it. I don't know if you have any further thoughts on the impact, John.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've had some really, really good anecdotal feedback, and I know and data show that a lot of these articles have been very, very well read as well. So it really feels to me like this has encapsulated a lot of the sort of positive momentum that there's been around making real change that has come about, I guess, from the tragic events of earlier this year. And I completely echo what Julian Obubo said, that, it really feels like this is about building a coalition, everyone doing what they can, investigating, listening, talking, trying things. No one's going to get it right all the time. There's no silver bullet, but there are certainly a lot of really positive initiatives that have been happening. And you can see that I think there has been change in the industry, even in the last few months. And I hope that time will show that that's not a sort of tokenistic, sort of knee-jerk, of the moment thing, but it's going to mean long-lasting change. I'm an optimist. I think that there will be some genuine, long-lasting change, but it's something that does need constant attention, and it's certainly something that we at PRWeek will continue to pay very close attention to, and celebrate success, and be, as I say, a critical friend to the industry, and also look at what we do and how representative we are, and making sure that we're kind of supporting this as a media title as well. So yeah.
And John, I think we should be. I think after you do an edition like this, you can't help but feel optimistic. That's why even, once we published, I was kind of like, I demand everyone to put pressure on their employees to buy a copy. If I had or seen something like this when I was starting out, I don't know how that would have made me. I know how I think it would make me feel, and I know how it made me feel now. But that's really important too. It's uplifting, and yes, we want to keep the conversation going, but also, it's been amazing. So one of the articles, for instance, was on the education article. The title was from young PRs who had studied PR at university. The title was, "We have to be our own role models." And obviously, that's after a summer of us behind the scenes having profiled like 50, maybe even more than 50, but 50-ish BME experts, not just talking about racism, but also on their field of expertise. So that's. I hope that changes for those guys, going forward. And I really echo what you said about being hopeful. And being hopeful, and I think I can't help but be after an issue like this. It's exactly what we needed to see, I think, after a tough year.
Absolutely, and I do. It's a very you can't help, if you're doing an issue like this, to sort of have certain elements being downbeat and being sort of stuff that the industry really needs to take a strong look at itself as a society. But I agree. It's about looking at those difficult issues and having those difficult conversations in order to move on, to have practical steps to improve the situation. And I know that at PRWeek, the way we generally work with our print editions is we focus them around big projects. So we tend to sort of, it's kind of go big or go home, really. So it was a real pleasure to be able to kind of throw everything at this and kind of really, I don't even know how many articles there are, individual articles we published on this. I'm going to guess maybe 30, 35. I haven't even counted. So it's a huge undertaking. It's a huge amount of work, but yeah. I really think that's where the value is. This isn't just because it's the right thing to do, because it's important from a moral point of view. It's really about trying to help and instruct and guide, if you like, if that doesn't sound too grandiose, the industry through these really difficult situations. It's not about finger pointing. It's about, there's constructive criticism there, but ultimately it's about getting to that goal, which is a sort of fairer, more equal industry. And it's something that, has been a privilege to be part of.
Yeah. And it's definitely a fair point, as in your role as a trade body, as a trade publication. And hopefully we see other industries take note and follow suit, because it's just been an amazing experience, but I won't repeat myself.
I'm going to, before we start the Q&A, I just wanted to say a few thank yous, actually. Obviously goes without saying, Joe and Julian, thank you for, the incredible amount of work you've both done, and guidance on this issue that would have looked very different without you. I'm not sure we could have done it. Well, we could have, but it wouldn't have been anywhere near what it is with the sort of the depth and the and the breadth of coverage. So thank you to my colleagues at PRWeek, to all the people who we interviewed and who filled in Q&As and sent over their photos and all the rest of it. Thank you to all of them. And obviously to our readers and to our subscribers. And I guess this is probably a good time for a really sneaky, very unsubtle plug. Do please subscribe to PRWeek. Get hold of the print edition and look at all these issues on our archive. They're all there on our website. So do please get involved. And Thank you again, and thank you Decision obviously for hosting today. So I think we can probably go over to some questions now.
Yeah, so thank you all. It's been really interesting hearing your thoughts, and I think one thing that stands out for me is that we haven't necessarily been talking about race the right way. And I think, there's a lot of slapping on initiatives without actually doing the groundwork, like you said earlier, Julian, within society, introspectively, and then also having the policies within organizations to support this as well. Hopefully our listeners will go away with a better understanding of how to address racism within PR. And now I'm going to go over to the Q&A because we have a lot of questions. Okay, so how can organizations with little ethnic diversity in its leadership, but a sincere desire to effect positive change in its sector, communicate to underrepresented groups?
Julian, does the blueprint cover any of that, or is there a parameter for who can apply?
I can address that. How can an organization with little ethnic diversity address underrepresented groups? I think the first thing I'd advise is for that organization to address why they have little ethnic diversity within that organization. I think that would be the first step in actually acknowledging if it could be an organization of 3 people, so it might not necessarily be a systemic issue. But if you have an organization that has very little diversity, especially in a city like London, it probably speaks to something systemic in the recruitment, in the hiring, in inclusion. And so first, sort of sort your house in order, get your house in order before trying to sort of implement initiatives or outreach. I think doing that analysis first, doing that self-analysis is a step that far too many businesses in this industry and outside skip. There isn't enough self or, business awareness before trying to say things and do things. So I advocate, and I'm sure John and Joe will tell you that I'm all about slow down before you speed up. Slow down, do that analysis, do that hard work of figuring out what is it we need to do, and then, that's when you can take a bold step. But yeah.
And also, so you might not have a diverse ethnic workforce within your company, but you can certainly support, if it's something you believe in, you can certainly support the next generation of PRs. There are many schemes, many charities, many, you can even launch, sorry, I'm just ad-libbing now, but you can even launch an internship scheme within your company, at least support them by giving work experience, by partnering on schemes, by working with diverse suppliers. There's definitely an array of, if you're creative about it and you think outside the box a little bit, there's definitely an array of ways to support the ethnic minority workforce and supply chain. Just off my head.
One thing I've heard some agencies do is going into schools in their local area. I mean, I don't know where this person's based, but quite a lot of the times going to sort of getting in touch with schools or local colleges or universities is quite a good way to sort of have a generally more diverse makeup. And I think particularly at sort of school level and, into sort of A levels and things like that, and to kind of get people more interested in PR generally. I appreciate that might not be a very direct way of doing it, but it's also quite a good way that, you might be able to get contacts. It might be a chance for sort of work experience, and you can kind of almost generate interest from the ground up, if you like.
And I think to your point on that, I know there are other questions, but what you've just said lends itself to that kind of non-racist versus anti-racist conversation. It's about being proactive about what you're doing. So going into a school like that, that's looking to the future. That's being intentional. That's investing in a talent pipeline, in a diverse talent pipeline. So that's a really good suggestion.
So on the note of anti-racism, so someone mentioned that we've covered representation, equality, and non-racism, but how do we move to anti-racism?
I think That's good. A good question. And implicit in this edition of PR Week, and which becomes explicit when you read it, is defining anti-racism as an understanding of context and a willingness and ability to challenge these things when they arise, and challenge issues of racism when they arise. I think where we've been so far in the industry is kind of a general acceptance of the fact that, oh, perhaps the industry is racist. But as I said at the start, we've had this narrow definition of what racism is. So by going back and broadening that definition, we can then understand and know where we can tackle racism when it does exist. And it can be big issues like, someone using a racial slur, which I think most people will challenge, but it's also knowing what a microaggression can be to a Black woman, for example, who keeps on having her colleagues touch her hair, right? And that's when you broaden that definition and you broaden that knowledge of the wider context, you can then empower yourself and your agency and your colleagues to call that out and to be bold with it and to understand why it's wrong, and not just reproduce slogans that are read on social media. There has to be an understanding. And I think anti-racism, for me, comes from an understanding of why it's wrong, and not just, oh, I read it in a paper, or, oh, someone I follow on social media said this is wrong, or a celebrity said this is wrong. You should empower yourself to understand why it's wrong, to call it out.
Mm-hmm. So I think you've hinted at this slightly, but someone has asked, what's the best way to call out racism when you see it within industry or in a campaign? Does anyone have any suggestions for that?
So as a member of the PRCA Race and Ethnicity and Equity Board, there are, if your agency or if your place of work is a member, there are dedicated avenues to that, to, I can't think of a better word than whistleblow, but to, have a safe space to be able to say, this is a problem, maybe it's a problem that's happened quite a few times, but there are safe spaces. Hopefully within your workplace there are safe spaces as well, and there are official routes, but I know a lot of people, and I know myself, I won't always, particularly if it's a microaggression, these happen on a daily basis. So you don't want to be launching investigations every 5 minutes. But yeah, so it depends on, I think there are a few different ways from the official routes, but I don't know if Julian, maybe you have some views on how to call things out. I know, sorry, just to, again, on a personal note, I know throughout my career, I haven't always called it out incident by incident the way that I on reflection, I think I should have. And I think part of the what's come out of this, the most recent resurgence of Black Lives Matter is having that confidence to call it out right in the moment, or speak to other colleagues and explain why that may be uncomfortable, because sometimes people don't notice what's happening in the room, or they don't associate it with being racially motivated. So I think it's hard to say, but start using your voice. It's not always easy when you don't know that it's a safe space, but I think in this environment now, it's hopefully for other people as well, getting easier to be able to call it out right there and then. But it does depend on the recipient. It depends on how it's received, because that's what makes it more difficult to step forward sometimes. But I'll let Julian pick that up as well.
Yeah, I was just going to say, call it out, even if it means putting it out on social media, because I think shame at times can also be a really good instigator for change. And if you're able to address the reasons why a particular campaign or incident was racist, you can do that publicly, but as John said, with nuance and with respect. And if that's done, if it doesn't devolve into name calling, if it doesn't devolve into a distraction from what the actual issue is, then I think that's where we can definitely see progress. Just call it out.
Mm-hmm. And I would hope that better by people. I know that I had a colleague who used to always say, oh, I can't even pronounce her last name. My last name's only 4 syllables, and her name, which was, you know, kind of more traditional English last name, was like 7 syllables. But, you know, I actually liked her. So she's not someone I would have wanted to call out or report or anything like that. She's someone I worked with really well. But yeah, I hope in this environment now, we're able to explain to people without them getting too defensive, you know, also just why you feel that, and also when it's happened to us a lot of times, why we feel that this is a racial incident. I think it's, unfortunately, sometimes it is almost, I don't agree that it should be, but sometimes it is almost up to us to educate and to have that two-way conversation.
Mm-hmm. Okay, another question here. I'm a PR in-house at a law firm. I'm white and middle class. What can I do to support the industry proactively?
I love this question.
John, do you want to answer that one?
I think it's an interesting question, but I think we also have to just reframe the way we look at it. And it would be, because there's an implicit expectation that if you're white and middle class, you either cannot change things effectively, or you either are not equipped to change things. And I want more white and middle class people to be as invested as we are in changing things, and not using that as necessarily a caveat. It's important that white and middle class people do not necessarily take up space and control the narrative and be the only people talking about this, but it's also important that this is about coalition building. So it's knowing what initiatives that you can set up, you know, like Joe was saying and John was saying, you know, could it be going to schools? Could it be setting up an internship? Could it be setting up a report on why your organization or industry is, you know, has a problem? But I definitely think white and middle class people should just ask themselves, what would you do if the tables were turned? What would you do, you know, if there was a problem of diversity and inclusion for white and middle class people? You get to work. Get to work.
I really like this question because earlier in the summer, I was being very active on my kind of personal social media about all of this. And someone who I am no longer really in touch with and forgot that she works in PR in the property industry, reached out and said, you know, I saw something the video that you posted the other day about advocating in the workplace and you know, not, if you're happy to celebrate kind of LGBT Pride Month, you need to if your employer, you know, posts about diversity and equality and other forms of diversity, but yet they've not said anything about being anti-racist and they've been hesitant, you have to ask the question, why? Why are they so uncomfortable with saying, I'm anti-racist, I don't believe in racism? And, you know, I don't know who's watching these things that I posted on Instagram, right? But she messaged me and she said, I just want to say that, you know, I have no black colleagues, but I did say to our senior head of comms, can we revamp and take over this week's communications newsletter and use education and materials, because it's all over the news and it's very much on the agenda. So can we do it? And they said yes. She pulled together resources, sent out that newsletter. She received 1 email back, but from a black woman who said, I'm the 1.2% in the property industry. I couldn't believe when I saw that you sent this email. It means so much to me, and I just want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. There's only one person who responded to that, and it probably took her a week of work pulling that together, but she did it because she felt it was the right thing to do. And she, in whatever little way that was, she made an impact. She made that person feel seen. And that's somebody who may have been sitting in their desk all week thinking no one cares about this. They're all pretending it's not happening. So you absolutely can contribute, because this, you know, this friend of mine, she was a white middle class, spurred on to do something. So I do think sometimes it can be as simple as asking the question. And there's very obvious times for that. So in the case of Black Lives Matter, you know, just maybe going to your boss, going to your head of HR or diversity and inclusion contact, and just say, why haven't we said anything? I think it's really important. Basically, use your voice. If you're in a position of privilege, use your voice.
One thing I've noticed doing our PRWeek's 30 Under 30 in recent years, in fact, Joe and Julian are two alumni, I don't know, former 30 Under 30 guys, folks. So one thing I've noticed in recent years with this is that there's a lot of younger people working in the PR industry that aren't really waiting around to do stuff. There's quite a lot of networking groups and sort of focus groups and campaign groups that are sort of starting. Sometimes they're kind of pan-industry. Sometimes they're people kind of doing stuff in their own organisation. So we've got examples of organisations like the UK Black Comms Network, and there are a few others that have come up fairly recently that are started by people who haven't been in the industry for that long, comparatively. I really get the impression that the sort of younger, in inverted commas, generation, sort of under 30s, probably certainly under 40s, aren't really waiting around for this to come up from on high. I think we're in a period of millennial activism, said someone who's just too old to be a millennial, and presumably Gen Z is, without wishing to stereotype too much about generations, is into this as well. So I actually don't think it's that unusual now for people who may think, well, who am I to change the culture of this organisation? I think a lot of people are just doing it. They're just doing things. And I think that's a real trend that I've noticed as someone from the outside in recent years in the comms industry, certainly.
Mm-hmm. So there's a question about names, and this person has asked, what's the best way to find out how to pronounce a name with a view of getting it right or not bothering trying? And this is interesting because I had a conversation with a friend yesterday about this, and she was saying to me, people avoid saying her names in calls because they don't know how to pronounce it. So instead of addressing her, they'll just avoid her completely. So how do you guys prefer people to address that?
And I think just ask, because I think the implicit thought that someone might take offense that you don't know how to pronounce their name would just lead to more isolation. And in this case, the person might have wanted to engage with that person, but would just feel, oh, I don't know how to say their name. It's simple to just say, how'd you say your name? And I've had it as well with Irish colleagues, where some people are unfamiliar with the name and do not even know where to start with a name that has fewer vowels than it should, and then it becomes an issue. You can just ask, how do you say Neve? And so I don't necessarily think it's just about. I think just loosening that idea that it's always a sensitive issue. The minute you think it's too difficult, then it becomes an issue. If in the West we can, talk about Russian names like Tchaikovsky and Dostoevsky, we can also pronounce African names that have three or four syllables. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with that. I think it's either you ask or you attempt to pronounce it and then you go, did I get that correct? It's not as sensitive as people think. And the very last question, we have a lot of questions, so sorry that we can't get through all of them. But the last question I'm going to go through is, how can we encourage organizations to hire or ask BAME speakers to speak at events that are outside of the topic of race? And I think Joe should answer this. We've actually spoken about this before.
Yeah, I'm not just, brown. I have a brain in my head. I have a day job outside of this. I think that is a good question. And also one of the, it kind of links in with a previous question that was just asked. A previous question was just asked about kind of allyship. What do I do as a white middle class person? A lot of the people on panels are traditionally white and middle class. So you are free to say, oh, how come we all look the same? Should we include some people of, different backgrounds potentially? The same way that, that the London mayor right now will not go on a panel if there's not a female spokesperson. Maybe that's, something that you as a person needs to commit to. If you sign up for an event and you notice that the panel or the entire agenda, because I've attended events like that where the entire agenda is white, say something. It's so easy to just email. And I have friends who are white and friends of Black heritage who have just said, I've been invited to be a judge for an awards show. but I'm looking at there's 15 people here and I'm the only black person. So people are speaking up more, and that doesn't need to be just a black person job. And in terms of hiring, yeah, sorry, I just looked at the time. I'll let somebody else respond.
So what was the question on hiring? Because the only thing I'll add to what Joe was saying was, yeah, just do it. You know, if you have someone in your agency or in your company that has expertise outside of the issues of race, put them forward to talk about what the expertise is in. So yeah, it should be a no-brainer. You know, just go ahead and do it.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to just ask one last question because I think this is quite important, right? So someone has asked, what's the best strategy to take when those in senior roles actively dismiss D&I initiatives even when they're challenged? And I think that's a big problem that people probably come against. So a quick 1-minute answer from someone, please.
Joe, do you want to take this?
Should I kick it off? So it's a difficult one, but I haven't taken this, route before. But Julian mentioned it earlier about going public. I think a lot of the fear and that a lot of the actions that came about this summer was because people understood about the reputational impact. And we are in the business of PR. So if you don't take on board, if you don't actually buy into what you're doing, take on board the reputational impact and start listening to voices who have had success in this area, who are experts in this area, and who will tell you and explain to you in detail, using statistics, using case studies, using examples, why this needs to be done. I think we're going to see this a lot in terms of ethnic pay gap. Yes, the gender pay gap has already come by and been implemented, so maybe that people will be more open to it. But I think that fear of doing something, or that what's the word, antipathy of doing something we can't let that continue. So the pressure needs to come from different angles. And I didn't touch on this within this, but I think the power of networks. If your organization has a network, you guys need to collectively use your voice as well. It's one person saying something needs to be done, but if you can sign a letter or say that the entire African Caribbean network or BAME network, everyone has signed this and said that this is kind of one of our demands. It really is about action. If they're not listening, make them.
Fabulous. That's all we have time for. Sorry for overrunning a little bit. Thank you for joining us, and thank you to our panel. Thank you so much. It was lovely having you. Goodbye.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks, Kevin.
Bye.